Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina for 5 minutes, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, Mr. McCall said the border is wide open. Director Wray testified about an elevated threat of guns and money and drugs across the border. Mr. Guest laid out a lot of the details about the record-breaking numbers, and he ended up having to talk more than get an answer from you on something. I just want to ask you, I've heard you and the Judiciary Committee recently in the summer testify that the border is secure. Secretary Mayorkas, do you continue to maintain that the border is secure?
Yes, and we are working day in and day out to enhance its security, Congressman.
Right. Thanks, sir.
We have remarkable.
I get it. I just wanted to make sure that still is your assessment. Director Wray.
It is, and it's very important, if I may.
Well, I know there's just not enough time for a lot of explanation. I know you've got written testimony and so forth. I just wanted to understand that's your position still. I think it is a position that denies reality respectfully, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to say, no, I think the situation's changed or something like that. Director Wray, do you believe that the border is secure?
Well, I can only speak to border security from our narrow lane, but I can speak to it from that lane. What I would say is that we see significant criminal threats coming from south of the border, whether it's guns, drugs, money, violence. We see transnational criminal organizations that are sending their drugs here and that are using street gangs here to distribute it, and that contributes to the violent crime crisis here. We've had takedowns just in the last few months that I could give you as an example. I'll give you just one quick one. In Phoenix, we had a takedown working with CBP, who are phenomenal partners, I should add, where we seized in one vehicle interdiction enough fentanyl to kill the equivalent of the entire state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
that's very troubling. One vehicle interdiction.
Thank you, Director Wray. Director Abizaid, does the NCTC assess a significant threat from the historic level of uncontrolled crossing at the southern border?
Thank you. We don't actually. Border security is really important. If we look at the nature of the threat and how it's evolved here in the United States homeland, it's been striking how the evolution to lone actors actually reflects how much more difficult it is for terrorists to enter into the United States. We look historically at the kind of attacks we've experienced here in the homeland. None of them have been connected to major illegal crossings or otherwise from the southwest border.
Right.
That said, it remains a top intelligence priority.
Director Wray spoke to that earlier about what has historically been true. It makes me mind.
Wondering about health insurance? Georgia's got you covered. GeorgiaAccess.gov will connect you with resources to find affordable options. Why wait? Visit GeorgiaAccess.gov today.
Mindful of the 9/11 report, that chapter that said the system was blinking red. It was a failure of the United States government agencies to anticipate a threat that should have been obvious to everyone. So it troubles me that the official response is, we don't think that's much of a threat. We have an unprecedented number of people coming across the border. A lot of them are being interdicted, but released into the United States without enough scrutiny. A whole lot more apparently coming in without being interdicted at all. And the official answer is, we don't think there's a terrorism problem there. Just hadn't happened in the past. I think, unfortunately, we're going to find out if it happens in the future. Reporting from The Intercept focused on the Department of Homeland Security's, and I guess CISA has been the focal point for it, interactions with social media companies. But one thing it related was that DHS sent an email to Twitter about a Twitter account that could imperil election system integrity. The user had 56 followers in a bio that had references to weed shops. Secretary Mayorkas, does the level of interaction with social media platforms, and that one specifically, that anecdote, not suggest that DHS is engaged in egregious overreach that threatens the First Amendment?
Congressman, I would note that the Intercept article focused its attention on the disinformation activities that preceded our administration. Let me assure you that our work to
As I'm
address
sure you can appreciate, we
disinformation,
can't dis-
which is a tool that our
The
nation-state
senator from Texas is
adversaries
recognized.
seek to employ to sow
Mr.
discord in
President.
this country, is something
senator
that
from
is
Texas is
very, very
recognized.
respectful of the civil rights and civil
As I'm sure you
liberties
can
of
appreciate.
individuals, as well as their privacy rights.
You maintain that always, but let me just ask, when you say it's respectful, are you attempting to conduct censorship by proxy as a means of evading the First Amendment?
We absolutely do not.
My time's expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well and appreciate greatly the commentary that you both gave earlier with reference to collegiality and an effort to get the optimum from this committee based upon the things that we can agree upon. I thank you both. Mr. Chairman and members, I'm on a mission of mercy today. I'm on a mission of mercy because of our immigration laws and a need for comprehensive immigration reform. Please allow me to call to your attention, Mr. Secretary, the case of one Mr. Jaime Avalos.
A troubled past that includes allegations of domestic spousal abuse.
A string of violent threats.
Say hello to New Jergens Melanin Glow, enriched with silky cocoa and shea butter.
Rosales. I'd like to have additional conversations with you about this because there is no way for me to give you the intelligence necessary at this time, the entirety of it. In 1996, Mr. Avalos came to this country at the age of 1 year. In 2013, he received DACA. He graduated from a high school in Houston, Texas, Bel Air High, 2014. No criminal record, Mr. Secretary. Married his wife, Yariana, and they now have a child who's approximately 1 year of age. Mr. Secretary, pursuant to the laws, he went back to Mexico, to Juarez, to the consulate, in an effort to submit himself for reentry into the country in a lawful fashion. The law permits this. It was discovered that he was brought back to Mexico at about the age of 7, came at the age of 1, taken back at the age of 7. And because he was taken back to Mexico at the age of 7, a child, he is now barred from this country for 10 years. He had an appointment with the consulate, went there in good faith, came here as a child, went back as a child, and because he went back as a child, he is now barred for 10 years. Won't be with his baby. Won't have Christmas with the child. A very sad circumstance that if it doesn't impact one's heart, I'm just sorry for the lack of sympathy and empathy that some people may have. So I'm appealing for some help. He's not a criminal. He didn't bring himself here. He didn't come on his own volition. He came as a child. And I'm trying my best to bring him home. I'm going to Mexico to visit with him. I'll be taking his wife and his baby. She's an American citizen. Baby was born in this country. They'll be going with me. I'd like to bring him home. And I would like to ask as much help as I can get from you and from our government. Let me say this before you give a brief response. I appreciate President Biden. He inherited a tough job, tough position, but he knew what he was inheriting, and he has taken up the challenge admirably, admirably. And I compliment you on doing the best that you can under the circumstances that exist and the laws that exist. The border is about as secure as it can be given the laws that we have. It is lawful for people to ask for asylum. That's lawful. It is lawful for us to consider the request. About as secure as it can be, given the laws that we have. You can't change the laws, but we can. And that's why we, many of us, keep insisting on comprehensive immigration reform so that we can deal with the situations that include Mr. Jaime Avalos Rosales. This needs to be dealt with. Shouldn't be banned because his mother took him home to register his birth as a child of 7 years. There is a law that requires persons who leave the country once you're here to go back to your consulate and then apply and be given consideration. But if you leave and come back to the country prior to your making that application, you're banned. So I'm hoping that we can do something to help him. And I'd like to know if I can visit with you, talk more with you about this, and many other cases, of course, but I'd like to visit with you. I yield to you, sir.
Mr. Secretary.
Congressman, I am, of course, not familiar with the case that you have described. I can say that U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the agency that deals with the administration of our legal immigration system, receives on almost a weekly basis cases that present tremendous heartbreak and sadness because of how broken indeed our system is. And those pleas for mercy come from both sides of the aisle.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes
We can't discuss.
I know that's always your
personnel matters.
excuse. No, I got it. I understand how you remain above the law by using that excuse repeatedly. The reason I'm a little sensitive on August 2020 is that on August 6th, both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent. I think
It's just bureaucratic. It's bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a
we
response.
offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, there is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president.
Well, there
by the
are
Office of the Director
there are
of National
persons in that
Intelligence.
interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing? The persons then.
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very
Yeah.
easy. It's
Uh,
very easy.
What I would say
It's a
to,
very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence. Although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation. Are you aware of the FBI having any involvement whatsoever in the October 19, 2020 public statement by 51 former intelligence officials?
I'm not aware of any involvement by the FBI in what you're describing.
The reason I ask is if it's true that in August of 2020, the FBI initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden, it would seem like maybe part of that scheme would be to get intelligence officials to issue a letter that stated that the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. That was totally false. We now know that the Hunter laptop is completely authentic. The point I'm trying to make here is the unsolicited briefing that was leaked in May of 2021 was used to smear me and interfered into the U.S. Senate election of November 2022. One of the whistleblowers to my committee has stated that the FBI was no longer going to interfere in election, something to that effect. I can't find it right now and I'm running out of time. Oh, here it is. The FBI is, quote, not going to change the outcome of the election again. Well, the FBI certainly tried to by leaking, or somebody leaked that FBI briefing. Are you going to investigate that? Because that is the election interference. And let's face it, this letter by 51 intelligence officials, this interfered in the 2020 election to a far greater extent than anything Russia or China ever could have hoped to accomplish. You have to acknowledge that. It has to be investigated. I have no faith that you will do so.
Senator Hassan, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Chair Peters, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Portman for holding this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for being here. And I want to add my prayers and thoughts for the CBP officers, the officer who was fatally wounded and those who are gravely wounded, and to their families. I think it's fair to say that the people of New Hampshire and the United States are holding these brave men and women in our prayers. I also wanted to take the opportunity, although he has stepped out for a moment, just to thank Ranking Member Portman for his years of service and for his work on this committee and for the bipartisan work that he has led. And again, to all of the witnesses, but more importantly to the men and women you lead, thank you, to them, their families. The first priority of government is to ensure the safety and security of its citizens, and your work is really critical to that mission. Director Abizaid, I want to start with a question to you and then a follow-up to the other two witnesses. When we held this hearing a year ago, some assessments indicated that in the wake of the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda would have the ability to reconstitute itself and threaten the United States homeland within 1 to 2 years. Here we are 1 year later. To the extent that you can discuss it in an unclassified setting, what is the National Counterterrorism Center's assessment of Al-Qaeda's capability to threaten the U.S. homeland?
Thank you very much for the question. Al-Qaeda's capability to threaten the United States homeland from Afghanistan is quite limited, in part thanks to the operation that killed Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul here recently, but also because the Al-Qaeda elements that are still present in Afghanistan are really not focused on external operations as far as we can tell. There are other terrorist elements in Afghanistan that we are concerned about, primarily ISIS's branch there, ISIS Khorasan. But the threat from Al Qaeda should be disaggregated from that, I think, given the very unique circumstances around that group, its relationship with the Taliban, and some of the specifics in which it has evolved over the years.
Well, thank you. Director Ray and Secretary Mayorkas, do you agree with this assessment? And what are your agencies doing to mitigate the threat? And I'll start with you, Director Ray.
I would add a couple things to what Director Abizaid had to say. One is we're obviously very concerned about ISIS-K
Right.
as one of the threats. Second, I think as time progresses, I am concerned that we will have fewer and fewer good sources of information about what Al Qaeda is or isn't doing in Afghanistan. So we always have to be mindful of, as Secretary Rumsfeld famously said, the known unknown that goes there. And then third, we are very concerned about Al Qaeda and ISIS's ability to inspire attacks even from over there. So those are a few points I would add.
Thank you. Secretary?
Senator, I think the point that my colleagues have made underscores a broader point, which is that we've spoken about the evolving threats, but we should keep in mind that the threats of the past remain the threats of the present. Only new ones have been added. And so I defer to the experts to my left.
Thank you. Now, Secretary Mayorkas, I want to move on to a different topic. Every week, a new drug seizure along the border makes headlines, but the flow of drugs across the southwest border is unrelenting. The drugs that DHS seizes accounts for just a fraction of the total that criminal organizations attempt to smuggle into our country. What specific steps is DHS taking to stem the flow of drugs crossing the border? And what additional resources are you using to address this problem? What additional resources do you need?
Senator, thank you so much. So it is a fact that the smugglers seek to transport controlled substances, illegal drugs into the United States, primarily through the ports of entry, through trucks, vehicles, and the like. And what we have done is we have surged technological resources that can most effectively detect the effort to smuggle those dangerous substances into our country. Specifically, for example, non-intrusive inspection technology, which has remarkable X-ray capabilities that can be implemented very, very swiftly. We have deployed forward operating labs so personnel scientists can detect the controlled substances and we can effect the seizure immediately and refer to law enforcement the persons who have sought to smuggle them. What we need is more resources like that, and we really hope that Congress passes our fiscal year 2023 budget. We are already 6 weeks into the new fiscal year.
Right.
Without the resources that we need financially to invest in that technology and deploy additional personnel as well.
Thank you. One additional question, I think, given my time to you, Secretary Mayorkas. Over the last few years, cyber attacks have plagued state and local governments and other public entities. Toward that end, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure laws, Senator Cornyn and I helped create a federal grant program for state and local entities to improve their cybersecurity. The application period for the first year of the grant program concluded just this past Tuesday. I understand that the Department of Homeland Security is still reviewing applications, but can you explain what the department's goals are for this first year of grants and how you intend to achieve them?
We are so grateful for that grant program. It's a multi-billion-dollar grant program over several years. This first year of its implementation, we are dedicating $185 million in resources to state and local governments. This is all about building their capacity to enhance the security of the cyber ecosystem. In cybersecurity, Senator, we say we are only as strong as our weakest link. And the fact of the matter is that there are target-rich and resource-poor localities that we need to strengthen. And that is what this grant program is going to enable us to do.
So your goal really right now is making sure that the state and local governments that have applied get the resources they need and really focus on strengthening that level of cyber security. Is that fair to say is a priority there?
Yes, it is, Senator.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Hessen. Senator Paul, you're recognized for your questions.
Director Ray, is Facebook or any other social media company supplying private messages or data on American users that is not compelled by the government or the FBI?
Not compelled, in other words, not in response to legal process. Is that
No
your-
warrant, no subpoena, they're just supplying you information on their users?
I don't believe so, but I can't sit here and be sure of that as I sit here.
Can you give us a yes or no by going back to your team and asking? Because it's a very specific question, because if they are, it's against the law. The law, the Stored Communications Act, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act of 1986 prohibits providers from sharing electronic communications with any person or entity unless it's compelled. This was done to protect the privacy of people so we could feel like we can send an email or direct message to people without having that information given over. It's a very specific question. Will you get with your team of lawyers and give us a specific answer? Because this is the law. If you're doing it, then we need to go to court to prevent you from receiving this information.
Well, I can tell you that I'm quite confident we're following the law, but what I will also
Well,
do
that's
is
not the
follow up
answer.
with-
That's
but-
not the
But I
answer.
will also follow up with you to make sure that we get you
Okay.
more information, more detailed information.
Is the FBI obtaining anonymous social media data and then using technical methods to pierce the anonymous nature of the data?
At Chewy, you can save on all the gifts you need for the gifts that keep on giving.
Smiles.
Because while
Anonymous social media data?
So you purchase data. People purchase data all the time, and we sort of tolerate it for advertising and things because it's anonymous data. Are you purchasing what is said to be anonymous data through the marketplace and then piercing the anonymous nature to attach individual names to that data?
Right, but when you asked about anonymous data, I was thinking more in terms of,
No, I'm talking about data that is
That-
out there. And are you purchasing data and then piercing the anonymous nature of that data?
so the manner in which we usually use the term commercial data, is probably longer than I could explain here, but again, let me have a.
So
one of our subject matter
you
experts
aren't
follow
prepared,
up with
you will not answer the question of whether or not you're attaching names to anonymous data.
I think it's a more complicated answer than I can give here.
So far, we're 0 for 2 with getting you to answer this, but you're pledging you will actually answer the question because you have to realize the frustration. We'll write you a letter and your team of lawyers will write back 15-page letter that says nothing and you won't answer the question. These are very specific. This is whether you're obeying the law, whether we can have confidence. I want to have confidence in the
We
FBI.
are obeying the law.
Well, you're saying that, but we won't tell us the answer.
I said.
So,
we
so
would-
you have
no,
to
I-
say yes.
That's not what I
yes,
said.
No, you aren't telling me the answer. And the answer is, are you collecting data not compelled by a warrant? That would not be in compliance with the law, but you won't answer that you're not collecting that data.
I said two things. One, we're following the law, and second, that we would have somebody follow up with you with more detailed, specific.
So those are two
information.
specific questions. Are you getting data from them that's not compelled? And then are you piercing the anonymous nature of that technically? Are you receiving private messages from social media companies through the use of confidential human sources? From Facebook, social media companies. You have people working over there who you're paying or who are volunteering to give you information, even though it would be against the law for Facebook to do this. But now you're saying, well, we'll get around the law by using confidential human sources.
You mean, just to be clear, I'm following the question. You mean, in effect, recruiting a human source inside the company?
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I don't believe so. I think what we have had situations where we have confidential human sources, not employees of those companies, but who report to us on their own communication.
Okay.
So if the two of us had a communication and Secretary Mayorkas was a human source, he could report to us about what he is saying to me.
Once again, I'd like
Yeah.
the answer to be more specific from your team. Not that I don't believe so, but that you are or are not using human confidential resources within Facebook. So we get back to the idea of whether or not you're getting information for them outside the warrant process, because the next question is, which you probably won't answer either, is, are you taking information that you're getting not through the warrant process and then going around and coming back and using that as a predicate for getting a warrant to actually get the information you've already been given?
I'm not sure I'm completely following the
Basically, you get information that Facebook's volunteering. This has all been written up in the Post article. You're familiar with the Post article with the accusations. And the question is, are you getting information they're giving to you? They say, oh, somebody says January 6th was great. Here's information on this guy. Then you're taking it and then using it as a predicate to say, well, now let's go to the court and get a real warrant and get the information we already actually got without a warrant.
So we get tips and leads from all over the place, from members of the public, from businesses, from community leaders, from other and government partners all the time. And we use the tips and leads that we get to often form predicates for law.
Are you getting tips and leads from Facebook and social media companies?
We get tips and leads from companies, absolutely.
Right. It includes private information.
But I'm not aware of us receiving any tips or leads.
Because see, here's the point is, you may think it's
just
just jolly well to get all this stuff without a warrant that people volunteer to you, but many of us are alarmed that you're getting this information that are private communications between people because it is against the law. It's against the law for Facebook or social media companies to give it to you, but it's also against the law for you to receive it. So you're going to have to very specifically go back with your team and search over whether you're doing it, not just say, we're probably not, we obey the law, we're good people. Well, no, there are doubts because this has been reported. Even the FBI, when you responded to the New York Post article, said that companies are referring information to the FBI with investigative value relating to foreign malign influence. Now, there'd probably be a great deal more tolerance about that if it's foreign malign influence. But the question is, are you also receiving information on so-called domestic? But what would that mean? Is someone questioning whether paper ballots are an accurate way of running election? Is that good enough for you to be getting our private information because we have a political beef with the way votes are counted or recorded in our country? Is that something that you're collecting information on? Are they giving you information on private things that you've told them? Well, people who question the election, we want to hear about these people. And so then they're giving you this information. Are you receiving information?
I'll give you two classic examples that I think happen with some frequency. One, if we supply information to, say, Facebook or any number of other technology companies about foreign accounts, Russian intelligence service, for example, accounts, when they then look in their system for those accounts, they often find other accounts related to those, and they provide tips and leads back to us about those. That's one example. A second would be a situation where a technology company encounters a threat of violence on their platform, on their services, and they provide tips and leads to us, and we follow up on those threats of violence.
There's probably not a lot of disagreement about that. The question is when we start to talk about political speech. And that is the question. Are you receiving things that could be interpreted? And we'd want to know, and if you're not going to admit to us, whether it's political speech, someone who questions the election, someone who is mad about something that is going on, but it's not saying they're directly going to commit violence. They're mad about things. What the New York Post article said is, yes, you're getting this. And then when they're finally read in context, and this is from a whistleblower, which makes us suspect you're not being forthcoming or honest with us, is that whistleblowers are saying you are receiving this information from Facebook and others, and that you are going around the Constitution then to come back and try to get warrants for it. But then once you read it, there's been no actionable intelligence on this, but this is an active program that you've got. You work for the government. You should admit to us whether or not you have a program going after our speech.
Thank you, Senator Paul.
We investigate violence, not speech.
Thank you, Senator Paul. Senator Langford, you're recognized for your questions.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to all three of you and the service that you give to the country on this. We do have lots of questions just about process and how things are going on this. Secretary Mayorkas, you and I have talked about Title 42 for about 18 months. And I've asked you the question, what happens when Title 42 goes away? And for 18 months, you've said, we're working on it. Well, Judge Sullivan just stepped in and unilaterally canceled out Title 42. So we're in this very odd situation right now where DHS is in one court asking to extend Title 42 a little longer, and in another court asking to cancel Title 42 altogether. But we're still waiting to try to figure out what happens now and how many people are about to cross the border. What's the plan for dealing with this mass migration, illegal immigration coming now post Title 42?
Senator, what we requested of Judge Sullivan in the District Court of DC was an orderly wind down period of 35 days, and which was unopposed and which was granted by the court. What we are doing is precisely what we announced we would do in April of this year, and we have indeed been executing on the plan. It's a six different lines of effort, and I will review them very, very quickly given the limited time. Surging resources to the southern border, including personnel, technology, facilities capabilities, and transportation, medical support. 2, increasing our Customs and Border Protection processing efficiency to mitigate potential overcrowding. We've been digitizing, for example, our electronic A files, the immigration files, when individuals are placed in proceedings. We are 3, enhancing the consequences for unlawful entry, especially with respect to individuals who seek to evade law enforcement, including removal, detention, and criminal prosecution when warranted. 4, we are seeking to bolster the capacity of nonprofit organizations, state and local officials, and working very closely with them. 5th, we are targeting and disrupting the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations. In fact, we have effected more than 5,000 arrests and more than 6,000 disruption events. And that means arrests of individuals, the breakdown of smuggling of stash houses, the seizure of the instrumentalities that these smuggling organizations use. And 6, we're working with our partners to the south to deter irregular migration. And I spoke earlier in response to Ranking Member Portman's question about the fact that this is a tremendous hemispheric challenge. We are seeing the movement of people, and the demographics of the population that we are encountering at the border has changed dramatically.
It has, and there's a couple of big challenges in this. One is the numbers just came in for October. It's the 3rd highest number in recorded history. So while those things were implemented, the numbers continue to accelerate, and this goes back to the estimates when Title 42 goes away. There was an expectation from Intel to be able to say these numbers will surge even greater. You built a Venezuelan policy on trying to be able to deter Venezuelans based on Title 42. That just went away. And so what we're trying to figure out is what is the plan? Because the plan you just articulated has led to the 3rd highest number for any single month in history.
So there are a few points, if I may, Senator, and thank you. Number one, the number of encounters is not equal to the number of unique individuals. whom
Correct. Yeah, we know that.
encounter,
Yep.
Because Title 42 creates a potential for the ease of recidivism, number one. Number 2, we're working with our partners to the south, with Mexico, with respect to the end of Title 42, and whether we will be able to continue our thus far successful program with respect to Venezuelan nationals and use our Title 8 authorities. But we also have other opportunities ahead of us because, as we sought to do earlier, and we will resume this effort, is an enhanced use of expedited removal, which is a Title 8 authority. So we're looking at our consequence regimes and how we can most effectively employ them.
A lot of people counting on these numbers coming down, and they're not. They're going up, and they continue to be able to rise. And so while we're examining these things and looking at it, the numbers continue to rise on this with the end of Title 42 coming in 35 days. We expect it's going to accelerate even higher. There is an expectation that your department is going to change this number dramatically. Let me ask a point-blank question that's challenging on this. What percentage of the individuals that are encountered at our southern border do we know their criminal history from the country they're coming from? I'm not talking about if they have an American criminal history or they're on our terror watch list, that we know their criminal history of the country they're coming from. Do we know that history?
I will have to get back to you on that, Senator, whether we have the capability of identifying the percentage, which is what you have.
It is my
inquired about.
understanding that we don't know the criminal history of the vast majority. Can you give me an estimate on this? I'm not asking for a 0.8%, but give me a guess.
I understand. I'm quite hesitant to guess on information that is so important to our mission, but I will certainly get back to you with whatever information we can provide.
It is incredibly important because I think there's an assumption that the American people feel that the 2 million plus individuals that were encountered just in the last 12 months have been vetted in some way at our southern border, or they've been checked. And we don't know if these individuals are fleeing poverty or fleeing from the law.
Oh, if I
We
may,
don't know. I mean, there is a check to see if they have an American criminal history record, but we don't know if they have a criminal history record or where they're coming from.
So as my colleagues here will will attest as well, Senator, we conduct screening and vetting of individuals whom we encounter. We have a robust screening and vetting process. It actually is recurrent vetting, and it is not just with respect to criminal history in the United States.
I'd like to give in a good guess of how many people we know their criminal history when they come in then.
As I mentioned, Senator, I'll get back to you and see if we have that data, and if so, I will certainly provide it to you.
That would be great. Thank you. We have asked your team, and you and I have talked about it before, about the information for the MPP and the decision-making process for the Remain in Mexico policy on this. We asked about that for a while. We just recently got a letter back saying that there are no responsive documents have been withheld. Basically, you have everything that we would have, but the implication then is the decision-making process of who qualifies for the MPP and who does not was left up to a case-by-case basis, and there are no guidance documents. I find that hard to believe that there were no guidance documents given to anyone on your team anywhere along the border on how to be able to decide, yet your team is so far telling me, hey, we don't have anything. We never printed anything. I find that exceptionally hard to believe. I'd like to be able to follow up and be able to get access to those documents.
I look forward to discussing
Thank
that
you.
with you because I certainly have some very important points to make in response to your concern.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
First, Secretary Mayorkas, thanks for your calls around the hurricanes. And I've had a very positive experience with FEMA. So I think you have a great team there, and everybody there does a good job.
Thank you, Senator.
And I think the last time, Director Ray, you testified, I had the opportunity afterwards to go to West Virginia to see, and I think I would just want to compliment you on what you've done to revamp the call center operation. I know I'm sure it's still hard to catch everything that goes on out there, but I want to thank you for that. Secretary Marcus, you know that I've been disappointed with the border. It just seems like it's open. We got all this fentanyl come across. We've got people dying. But here's my question, and I don't know, Secretary Marcus or Director Ray, if you want to answer it. It's been reported that the Chinese Communist Party are operating police stations in the United States in an effort to surveil Chinese dissidents. Seems obvious the U.S. shouldn't allow its most significant geopolitical rival, an oppressive communist regime, to establish police stations in the U.S. What authority or jurisdiction does the CCP have in the U.S.? And I don't know which one wanted to testify.
Well, Senator, like you, I'm very concerned about this. We are aware of the existence of these stations. I had to be careful about discussing our specific investigative work, but to me, it is outrageous to think that the Chinese police would attempt to set up shop, in New York, let's say, without proper coordination. It violates sovereignty and circumvents standard judicial and law enforcement cooperation processes. And the reason this is so important is because we have seen a clear pattern of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, exporting their repression right here into the U.S. And we've had now a number of indictments that you may have seen of the Chinese engaging in uncoordinated quote unquote law enforcement action right here in the United States, harassing, stalking, surveilling, blackmailing people who they just don't like or who disagree with the Xi regime. And so it's a real problem, and it's something that we're talking with our foreign partners about as well, because we're not the only country where this has occurred.
They don't have any right to be here, right?
Well, we're looking into the legal parameters of it. So I want to be a little bit careful not to get out over my skis on that. But suffice to say, I can tell you from an FBI director perspective, I'm deeply concerned about this, and I'm not going to just let it lie.
Secretary, does it impact Homeland Security at all?
Well, of course, the threat of China is one of the most significant threats that we face in the homeland. It's not only a matter of national security, it's a matter of homeland security in a number of arrays, in a number of areas of our mission.
Do you think you have the ability to shut them down? Do you know if you have the right to shut them down?
I would have to defer to the Department of Justice with respect to the
It would go
the
to
legal
Justice,
authorities.
not Homeland Security? Okay, so it would be under FBI?
Well, or to the extent that the remedies might be some part of the Justice Department outside the FBI, that could also be a possibility. And then there may be a State Department dimension to this that we're looking into.
So when you know they're here, do you know if they're surveilling U.S. citizens? Do you know that yet? do you have enough information to know if they are?
Well, again, I don't want to get too far into our ongoing investigative work, but as I said, we have seen plenty of situations in the past where the Chinese government, under the pretext of going after corruption, have essentially used that as a vehicle to surveil. We've had situations where they've planted bugs inside Americans' cars, for example. And one of the things that we're seeing more and more is them hiring private investigators here in the U.S. to essentially be their agents, if you will, to conduct some of this work. So this is something we're trying to call out, and it's important that Chinese Americans and Chinese dissidents who are here know to call the FBI to report when they think they may have been targeted with this
So
conduct.
could you, because you probably can't talk about it in here, I'd like to get a classified briefing on what they're doing. So at some point, so whenever it works out for you
We'd be
guys.
happy to set that up.
So Director Ray, so what I'm asking you, you just tell me if it's accurate or not. So I'm not suggesting all this is accurate, but it appears that DOJ have become politicized with regard to pro-life things. So there's a recent rise in high-profile FBI investigations of pro-life Americans, which raises the current concern that the FBI is weaponizing federal law enforcement and has become a tool, a partisan tool, which I don't think when we've talked that's been your goal. So there appears to be investigations that arrest the pro-life community, and it's just the opposite of what's happened. We've had numerous fire bombings, violent attacks, acts of vandalism against churches, pro-life organizations, and crisis pregnancy centers in the days following the leaks of the Dobbs opinion. So what, I mean, is this right? Is that happening, not happening?
Well, first let me say, I firmly believe that the FBI is going about its work and doing the right thing in the right way. Now, I'm glad you raised this topic because it gives me an opportunity to speak to it. We have our view, my view, plainly expressed to all of our people, including in the context of abortion-related violence, is that I don't care what side of the issue you're on, you don't get to engage in violence. And we are equal opportunity when it comes to that. Now, we have quite a number of investigations as we speak into attacks or threats against pregnancy resource centers, faith-based organizations, and other pro-life organizations. And you might be interested to know that since the Dobbs Act decision, probably in the neighborhood of 70% of our abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life. It's where the victims are pro-life organizations. And we're going after that through our joint terrorism task forces, through our criminal authorities, FACE Act and things like that. We have about 20 field offices involved in this. And so we take it very seriously. And again, I don't care whether you're motivated by pro-life views or pro-choice views, you don't get to use violence to express it.
So we've talked about this before. It just seems to me that in DOJ, FBI in particular, they might be doing the right thing, but you guys allow information to go out that not talking about what you're doing. Because if you read the press, you would think that you guys are only going after pro-life groups and not going after groups that attack pro-life. So I've never understood this about the FBI and DOJ, in that you guys aren't more proactive about what you're actually doing. Because I'm pro law enforcement, as you know, and so, but I can't defend you with no information.
Senator, I think we don't have the time for me to tell you how frustrated I sometimes get by some of the news reporting about our work and the misreporting about our work. The circumspection that we display with regard to discussing our investigations is based on rules and practices that are important to people having confidence in the integrity of our work and go back decades in multiple administrations. And sometimes it can be very frustrating to agents on the ground when they see things being misreported about their work. But we have all been taught that we have to bite our lips and let the facts come out in the right way through court proceedings. And sometimes that can be very frustrating to us, and it sounds like to you too.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Scott.
Can I just finish something?
We'll have a second round, but real quick.
I just want to, it makes it hard for us, right? Because people come to us with, say, oh, yeah, they must have done that. So.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Hawley is deferred to Senator Romney. Senator Romney, you are recognized for your
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Hawley. I appreciate the chance to be able to ask a few questions. Director Ray, I begin by saying how much I appreciate the work of your agents and how much I respect them and how convinced I'm of their quality. One of my sons years ago interviewed to become a member of the FBI. He was turned down. He was able to go on and get a degree at Harvard Business School and has done quite well. So he survived. But we learned from that experience that the qualifications for getting into the FBI are high indeed, as they should be. And I have great respect for the men and women who work for the FBI. There is a great deal of discussion about the political orientation of the FBI. My experience with your organization is that that is not the case by and large. I'm sure there are individuals among the 38,000 who work with you who have political points of view, may leak things and may do things from time to time that are not appropriate. And I hope that you're able to evaluate them and evaluate where those come from and correct them. Can you give us a sense of how the resources of the FBI are directed? How much goes into looking at violent crimes of various kinds and human trafficking? How much goes into terrorist-related prevention? The kinds of, if you will, are there categories of effort that are carried out? Because I think there's a public perception that the whole FBI, we had to defund it because it's only doing political work. What is the FBI doing? Where are the resources devoted?
So if you were to look at our allocation of resources, and I can't give you the numbers off the top of my head, but if you were to look at the allocation of our resources, you would see that the single largest chunk is devoted to traditional criminal programs, and of which the violent crime is by far and away the biggest. And we have safe streets task forces all over the country. We have transnational organized crime task forces all over the country. We have violent crimes against children task forces. So those remain our bread and butter. Those remain our biggest programs. We do have unique responsibility for national security threats as well. And so if you were to look at our strategy, you might see the national security threats listed first, because those are places where if we don't do it, no one will, right? Whereas violent crime, crimes against children, we work much more, shoulder to shoulder with our state and local law enforcement partners. So a lot of times those national security threats, terrorism, counterintelligence work, cybercrime, get most of to Senator Scott's point, the media attention. But in, day out, the FBI that most Americans and certainly most law enforcement professionals and I talk to chiefs and sheriffs every week, the FBI they experience most is really more focused on the traditional criminal stuff.
Yeah, thank you. You've spoken a great deal about the cyber attacks from state actors from China as well as non-state actors. Secretary Mayorkas has spoken about that as well. I don't know that it's possible to, through a process of defending against attacks, to prevent all the potential attacks and all the theft that will come from our businesses and into our government. It strikes me that the only effective way to stop the attacks that come from of a cyber nature is to attack back, that the best defense is a good offense. And I know your respective organizations are not responsible for the offensive side of this, but to get China to stop attacking, they've got all these private enterprises that are doing these attacks into our systems. Fighting against all these things will never stop it unless China recognizes that if they don't stop it, that they're going to be hurt more than we are. Do you believe we have a sufficient effort in an offensive effort to push back against the cyber attacks that come from state and non-state actors? And should we expand on that? And where should that reside? And I'll ask both Director Ray as well as Secretary Mayorkas and Director Abazad to respond.
So certainly when it comes to offense is a critical part of our overall effort to push back against cyber adversaries. In addition to some of the offensive cyber operations that we probably couldn't, talk about in this kind of setting, there's actually a lot of progress being made in what I obliquely referred to earlier as joint sequenced operations, where we, with our partners, intelligence community partners, law enforcement partners, foreign partners, go with the whole 2+2 to make 5 kind of effect. So we're going after the adversary's infrastructure. We're going after their cryptocurrency. We're going after the individual actors. Some of them we can extradite. Some of them we can have charged there. We're engaging in other sort of more sensitive counterintelligence type work to amplify those effects. But what we have found is that when we go after the actors, the infrastructure, and the money all simultaneously, we can degrade and disrupt their effectiveness. It is, I think that is really ultimately the real goal, is to degrade, disrupt, and defend in that way. In some ways, the deterrence model is harder. Much the same way, we're not going to deter the Chinese or the Russians from spying, but we can make it hellishly difficult for them to do it. And that's what we're after now, is imposing risks and consequences on the adversaries to hit them where it hurts, to make it harder and harder for them to really come after us with cyber means.
Thank you.
If I may, Senator, add a point, because of course, I don't need to speak of the criticality of a strong defense. And you are, of course, focused on, offensive behavior. A few weeks ago, I was in Singapore to speak to our allies in the Indo-Pacific region about the importance, or I should say, the peril of having China own or operate other nations' critical infrastructure, and the perils it presents from a cybersecurity and other security perspectives. And it was a very important dialogue, not only with our Singaporean partners, our Japanese partners, but other countries in the region, because China is very aggressive in seeking to own or operate the infrastructure in telecommunications and other technologies.
Thank you, Director. Yes.
Senator, I would just say, I'll defer to my colleagues on the cyber-specific piece of your question, but what I would say from a counterterrorism community perspective, there's so much that we have learned as a collaborative community about both offense and defense at the same time, that those lessons learned applied to things like transnational organized crime or cyber threats, I think really position us well as a government to take it to the threat actors.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Director Wray, let me start with you if I could. I think the last time that I got to visit with you was back in August 4th of this year. You were at the Senate Judiciary Committee. You remember that, I assume. We had to cut that hearing short. We were supposed to do 2 rounds of questions. You said you had to be somewhere, so we cut it short. Republicans were not able to ask a second round as we had been informed we would. The press reported shortly thereafter that the reason that the hearing had to be cut short is because you were flying on a Gulfstream jet for a personal vacation in the Adirondacks. Please tell me that's not accurate.
Senator, the hearing was not cut short from my experience. We had agreed beforehand on the time and length of it. And I was very surprised to find that anyone on the committee was surprised. As to how I fly, I am required, not only permitted, but required to fly on an FBI plane wherever I go. That's
So you were going on vacation?
I was, yes.
So you left a statutorily required oversight hearing in order to go on a personal vacation in the Adirondacks?
I took a flight to go visit my family, as had been previously arranged in conjunction with the leadership of the committee.
The ranking member, Chuck Grassley, asked you during the hearing, he said, I assume you must have other business. You said, yes. He then said, if you have a business trip, you've got your own plane, can't it wait a while? He then said, Chuck Grassley, we only just heard half an hour ago that now you have to leave. We were going to have a 7-minute round followed by a 3-minute round. I've got 7 people on my side of the aisle, that included me, who are waiting for this additional round. Is there any reason we can't accommodate them for 21 minutes? And you said you had a plane to catch. You had somewhere to go. And now we find out it was for vacation?
The reference to other business was not a reference to that day. It was a reference to the following week where Senator Grassley and I were going to see each other in Iowa when I had other business in Iowa. And I did, in fact, see him then.
So wait, you had to leave the hearing early because you're going to see him later in Iowa in a week?
No, I had to leave when I said I was going to have to leave, as had been previously organized with the leadership of the committee.
You left an oversight hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee required by statute so you could vacation with your family. I find that absolutely unbelievable and frankly, indefensible. Now, is it your practice to use government planes? You say you do this all the time. You flew in a Gulfstream 550, I think, that was originally purchased for counterterrorism purposes. You were using it to go to, what is it, Saranac Lake? Is that how I say it? I've never been there. Is that the right pronunciation? Saranac Lake? That was your destination?
Yes.
So, did you enjoy the flight? I mean, did you pay for it?
Yes, I paid for it.
Will you turn over all receipts and reimbursement to this committee?
Senator, we will be happy to comply with oversight requests related to the use of the plane, as I said, and it's important for people to understand.
Why don't you just give me a yes? Will you turn over the receipts
I
for
will turn
your
over the
flight?
information
this
related to my
committee?
use of the plane. The use of the plane, I am required, not just permitted, required, even for personal travel, to use the FBI plane.
How convenient for you.
And I pay every single time that I use the plane for personal
I'm
use,
glad it's
I pay
available for
it.
you to jet away from your statutorily required hearings and oversight before this Congress, where you denied the ability of members of Congress to ask you questions because you had to go on a personal vacation using a government plane. Let's just look at some of the things while you've been vacationing that your FBI has been doing. According to numerous whistleblowers who have come forward to members of this body, to members of the House, the FBI has been sending more than, in one instance, a dozen armed agents to a rural Pennsylvania home of a Catholic pro-life demonstrator to arrest him at gunpoint in front of his children in early morning hours, despite the fact that he posed no risk of violence or threat and had previously offered to turn himself in. Numerous whistleblowers, field agents, have alleged that DC, your headquarters, has pulled them off working on child sex abuse cases, working on human trafficking cases, in order to work on January 6th matters for this reason, to give the appearance, they say, that there are hundreds of new domestic terrorism cases in the country, when in fact there are not. Whistleblowers, field agents have also said that DC has ordered the use of SWAT teams on nonviolent suspects who may have attended a January 6th rally, and they have been ordered to conduct surveillance and knock on doors of people who were not even in DC on January 6th. And again, all of this, according to the whistleblowers, these are your agents, all of this in order to make it look as if there's a mass surge in domestic terrorism all across the country, when in fact, the stats are being padded by political directive in your office. They also say, these whistleblowers, the DC leadership deliberately suppressed investigations into Hunter Biden, contrary to FBI procedure, and have also retaliated against FBI agents and whistleblowers who have contacted Congress, which, by the way, they are protected by statute to do so. This is what's happening at your FBI while you are evading oversight hearings. Mr. Director, do you think you're still up to this job?
I absolutely think I'm still up to this job, and I think our workforce feels the same way.
Well, I don't. And frankly, I think you should have been gone a long time ago. And given your behavior recently, I think it only makes it more clear. Are there any travel plans today that we should be aware of that you have? We're supposed to have a second round. Will you be here for that?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. I wanted to thank DHS before I get started with my questions for extending TPS to several countries last week. It's going to provide critical relief to thousands of families in Nevada. Those families appreciate that very much. And we do know that Congress must take action to enact immigration reform that both secures our borders and provides a path to citizenship for TPS recipients, dreamers, and others. But as we work towards this goal, I do appreciate, and the families in Nevada appreciate your consideration. And so I'm going to turn now to the topic of the hearing, threats to the homeland. Difficult subject, again, like all things here, but rising anti-Semitism. Every day in every way, we see more and more attacks, outbreaks of anti-Semitism here in the United States. The recorded incidents nationwide, I believe they're at an all-time high. Not a day goes by without another report of an anti-Semitic hate crime or prominent individuals inciting anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. With Jewish communities around the world facing increasing discrimination as well as threats and acts of violence, a whole of government approach is needed to effectively address anti-Semitism. Because many individual agencies play a critical role in combating anti-Semitism, we need closer interagency coordination to share best practices, share that ever important data that keeps us safer when we share it, that intelligence, the same thing, identify gaps in our efforts between agencies, and streamline overlapping activities and roles so that we can best combat anti-Semitism where we see it, and I believe execute a unified national strategy. So Secretary Mayorkas, how is DHS coordinating with other federal agencies in the fight against anti-Semitism? Would you support the development of a national strategy that uses a whole of government approach, cohesive, comprehensive approach to address this rising threat for all of us?
Senator Rosen, thank you. I think Director Ray spoke very powerfully, but a couple weeks ago, I believe it was in New York City, about the rise in anti-Semitism. And of course, where we become involved in the Department of Homeland Security is the connectivity between an ideology of hate, regardless of the ideology in particular, and violence. That is where we become involved. And we are working very, very closely with the FBI and our federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, campus law enforcement partners to address violence, an increasing level of violence born of ideologies of hate. And quite clearly, anti-Semitism is one of the rising ones, and it was at a high level to begin with. We are very grateful for your and this committee's support of the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. We are seeking in the fiscal year 2023 budget an increase from $250 to $360 million. That assists religious institutions, faith-based institutions, and other nonprofit organizations to really raise their level of security in response to increasing violence born of hate. The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have published an unprecedented number of alerts and bulletins to our local state law enforcement personnel about an increasing threat level born of ideologies of hate.